Most women believe that to attract a man, they must be more present. But what if the opposite is true? Imagine this. A woman vanishes without a trace, not out of cruelty but out of an instinct older than memory. She withdraws like the moon pulling itself behind the veil of clouds, and suddenly the man who once seemed distracted, indifferent, or secure begins to feel her absence with a sharpness that cuts into his very bones. He is left in a room that feels colder, where every object she once touched seems charged with an invisible electricity. Her silence becomes louder than her words ever were, and he finds himself circling the empty space she left behind, unable to look away. The mystery here is not about the woman's disappearance in a literal sense, but in the archetypal sense. It is the ancient pattern of the High Priestess, the silent oracle who does not reveal her power in noise or excess, but in retreat. In Jungian language, this is the moment his anima projection begins to stir. He once looked at her as though she was the mirror of his inner longing, a reflection of his own unlived depths. While she remained available, the fantasy could rest quietly. But the moment she steps back, the projection begins to haunt him, and his obsession ignites. Think of it like this. The masculine psyche is often outwardly focused, chasing external goals, order, and conquest. He assumes what is present will remain present. But when the feminine pulls away, she disrupts that assumption. She withdraws into her own inner sanctum, the place of shadow and intuition, where he cannot follow. And in that void, his carefully managed control begins to unravel. What obsesses him is not just her physical absence, but the unbearable confrontation with his own unlived longing. The vanished woman awakens the recognition of something missing in him, something he cannot simply chase down or conquer. You may not notice it at first, but the paradox is this. It is not the noise of your presence that shakes him. It is the silence of your absence. When you vanish, he feels as though a mirror has been stolen from him, and he is left face to face with nothing but himself. His obsession is not merely for you, but for the image of his anima he believes you carry. That is why he replays the last word spoken, studies the last look exchanged, and feels each second of silence as if it were a blade pressing against the skin. For the woman, this silence is not an act of cruelty but of reclamation. It is the turning inward, the refusal to be endlessly consumed by his gaze. Jung wrote of individuation as the path of becoming whole, and for the feminine, vanishing is often the first step toward reclaiming wholeness from projection. By withdrawing, she becomes less of a mirror and more of a sovereign being. She chooses shadow over spotlight, mystery over exposure, and that choice forces him to confront what lies beneath his carefully built persona. The symbolic image here is of a forgotten key resting on a stone floor. He believes the key will unlock her mystery, but the truth is, it is not a key to her. It is a key to himself. And the more he tries to use it on her door, the more the lock resists. Obsession grows where understanding cannot enter. This is why men stalk old conversations, search for hidden meanings, and spin stories in their minds when a woman vanishes. The silence awakens not just desire, but a deep fear of abandonment and rejection, buried within their own shadow. And yet here is the twist. Your silence is not only his torment but your initiation. In walking away, you are called into a deeper archetype, the High Priestess who knows that her worth is not negotiated in constant visibility. You do not beg, explain, or chase. You become the unspoken, the hidden, the one who commands attention not by reaching for it but by holding it at a distance. This is why obsession forms. You are no longer his mirror. You are the oracle behind the veil, the shadowed flame he cannot grasp. If you allow yourself to see it clearly, you will realize this paradox. Presence wins affection, but absence tests obsession. And when obsession stirs, a man's shadow reveals itself with a clarity that his words could never confess. What he cannot control, he cannot forget. And what he cannot forget, he must endlessly circle like a moth to the flame. So ask yourself, when you vanish, do you fear his silence, or do you see the storm you awaken within it? When a woman retreats into silence, a man does not simply miss her. He collides with the unseen parts of himself that her presence once concealed. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with his anima, the inner feminine image he projects onto the women he desires. While she is present, she acts as the vessel of his fantasy, carrying the luminous weight of his longing, his ideal, his unspoken yearning. But when she vanishes, he is left holding an empty frame, staring at a blank surface where her face used to be, and tea. The shock of this absence burns deeper than rejection. It is the loss of a psychic tether, the unraveling of a projection that had become a part of his own identity. The masculine ego often builds itself on control, on knowing, on defining the world in terms of order. A woman's silence disrupts that order like a storm that erases the horizon. He cannot predict it, cannot manage it, cannot find the familiar pattern that reassures his mind. This absence creates what Jung described as psychic tension, the unbearable pull between what is conscious and what remains hidden in shadow. Her silence drags his gaze inward, not toward her, but toward himself. He obsesses, not only because he wants her, but because he fears the collapse of the illusion he constructed around her. She becomes a riddle that cannot be solved, a mirror that refuses to reflect, a keyhole that will not yield. In this space of absence, his imagination becomes his greatest tormentor. He projects stories into the silence, weaving meaning from nothing. Did she leave because she lost interest, or because she saw something weak in him? Was her distance punishment, indifference, or power? He circles these questions like a wolf around a fire, never daring to step too close but unable to walk away. This is the moment where obsession begins to devour him from the inside, where every unanswered question multiplies until his thoughts become a labyrinth with no exit. But the deeper truth lies in what her silence represents. It is not only the withdrawal of her presence, it is the withdrawal of his projection. For the first time, he is forced to see the distance between the woman as she truly is and the woman he imagined her to be. This gap is unbearable to the ego, which craves certainty and possession. The more he obsesses, the more he unconsciously resists the truth. She was never the goddess he imagined, but he placed that crown upon her head because he could not bear to face the emptiness in himself. And here is where the woman, if she understands her role, steps into power rather than fear. Her silence is not just absence, it is initiation. By refusing to fill the void with explanations, she forces him into his own confrontation. She becomes the High Priestess, not speaking, not justifying, but holding the veil closed. In myth, the priestess guards the threshold between worlds, allowing no one to pass until they have proven their readiness. In the same way, her withdrawal demands that he face the shadow within himself before he can hope to meet her as she truly is. The microaction for you is subtle but transformative. Resist the urge to break the silence. Most women fear that distance means disconnection, that silence equals loss. But when you rush to explain, to reassure, to make yourself present again, you strip away the very mystery that awakens his deeper psyche. Instead, hold the silence as if it were sacred. Do not fill it. Do not apologize for it. Allow it to breathe. For it is in that space where he is forced to confront himself. And in that confrontation, his desire transforms from casual interest to something far more consuming. Remember the forgotten key resting on the stone floor. He believes it opens your door, but it does not. It was always meant to open his own. Each moment of your absence presses him closer to that realization, though he will fight it, resist it, deny it. The more he tries to unlock you, the more he discovers the hollowness of his projection. And yet, this is precisely why he cannot look away. Because what obsesses him is not merely you. It is the unbearable awareness of the inner world you represent. What you must understand is this: silence is not the weapon of the cruel, but the language of the sovereign. It is the refusal to perform, the refusal to explain, the refusal to collapse into his need for certainty. In that refusal, you create not only obsession but respect. You become untouchable, not because you are absent, but because your absence reveals the depth of his own longing. So the question becomes, will you fear the weight of his obsession, or will you recognize it as the mirror of his shadow trying to speak through you? When obsession grips him, it is not truly about the woman who has vanished, but about the fragmented pieces of his own psyche that now surface like restless ghosts. The anima, once projected onto her, now turns inward, demanding his attention with a ferocity he does not understand. He feels haunted by her face, by her silence, by her absence, but the haunting belongs to his own unclaimed soul. In Jungian language, this is the moment when the shadow rises. He confronts the hunger, the fear, and the loneliness he has always tried to bury beneath ambition, logic, and control. The paradox of feminine absence is that it awakens what presence cannot. When she is near, he can distract himself with her laughter, her touch, her words. But when she withdraws, she becomes vast, immeasurable, mythic in ska. She transforms in his mind from woman to oracle, from lover to archetype. The High Priestess who sits behind the veil no longer offers him easy access to warmth or reassurance. Instead, she demands he face the inner chasm her silence illuminates. This is why obsession feels like madness. He is not simply longing for her, but grappling with the abyss within himself. For the woman, this is the dangerous threshold. Many falter here because the pull of his obsession can feel intoxicating. To know that one's absence commands such power, that one's silence stirs such turbulence, can tempt her to return too soon. But the true power lies in holding the line. When you stand firm in your silence, you refuse to be consumed by his projection. You do not allow yourself to become the drug that soothes his discomfort. Instead, you remain the priestess, guarding the doorway, forcing him to confront his own fire. Imagine him pacing a room at night, restless, unable to sleep, reaching for his phone but stopping short. He composes words he will never send, rehearses speeches he will never deliver, all because your silence has turned the ordinary into the sacred. This is not about cruelty, it is about contrast. He must learn the difference between desire that consumes and connection that liberates, and that lesson can only be born through the wound of absence. This is the secret most women never discover. Your silence is not emptiness but a mirror that reflects his shadow. The temptation is to break it with reassurance, to soften it with presence. But when you do, the mirror shatters and he escapes the confrontation once again. Hold the silence, and he cannot run. He must face what has been hidden all along. The microaction here is both subtle and difficult. Practice sacred withholding. Not in manipulation, not in cruelty, but in sovereignty. Do not answer every message, do not explain every emotion, do not offer your inner world cheaply. Let him feel the distance. Let him circle the silence until he begins to realize that his obsession is not for you, but for the unlived depths you represent. Only then can he begin to individuate, to separate the woman from the projection, the human from the goddess he placed upon a pedestal. And here lies the deeper transformation for you. By withdrawing, by refusing to perform, you step into your own archetypal power. You are no longer the reflection of his desire, no longer the canvas for his projections. You become sovereign. You are whole, whether he understands or not. And in that wholeness, you are not waiting for him to return. You are tending to your own inner fire, the flame that cannot be extinguished by silence or absence. Remember the forgotten key. It lies still on the stone floor waiting, but it was never yours to pick up. It belongs to him. If he dares, he will use it to unlock his own inner doors, to meet himself beyond the projections, beyond the shadow, beyond the fantasy. If he does not, he will remain obsessed, circling the flame without ever touching its truth. But either way, you remain untouchable, not because you vanish to punish, but because you vanish to preserve the sanctity of your own soul. So the cliff opens here. When a man obsesses over the silence of a woman, is it truly about her? Or is it about the reflection of himself that he cannot yet bear to face? When the silence deepens and days stretch like unmarked pages, something inside him begins to fracture. At first, he may rage against the void, trying to call her back through words, gestures, promises, but none of it crosses the veil she has drawn. The masculine ego is accustomed to conquest, to reaching and claiming, but in the face of absence, the weapons of pursuit turn blunt. He finds himself cornered, not by her resistance, but by the echo of his own emptiness. Each unanswered silence reverberates louder until it becomes unbearable music, forcing him to hear the hidden song of his shadow. This is where the true power of the feminine archetype reveals itself. The High Priestess does not demand attention. She draws it by existing in a realm he cannot control. Her power lies not in the chase, not in endless giving, but in sovereign distance. She lives in her own inner temple, lit by a flame that does not flicker at the gusts of his longing. This is what unsettles him most, that she does not need him to exist. And it is precisely this independence that makes her unforgettable. He cannot dismiss what does not depend on him. He cannot conquer what does not bow. From the Jungian perspective, this dynamic is the collision between persona and shadow. The man, accustomed to living through his persona, the role, the mask, the face he shows to the world, suddenly finds himself exposed to his shadow when the mirror disappears. The woman's silence rips away the comfort of reflection, leaving him raw, forced to glimpse the darker aspects of himself he preferred to ignore. His obsession is less about her than about tea. He terror of facing the unpolished, unclaimed pieces of his psyche. He feels he has lost her, but in truth, he has lost his illusion. For the woman, the task is not to yield to the temptation of explanation. Explanation weakens the veil, reduces the archetype to the personal. Mystery sustains magnetism. Silence forces him to wrestle with himself, while presence tempts him to project again. The micro-action here is this: choose presence within, not presence without. Instead of offering answers, turn inward. Journal the emotions that arise, breathe into the solitude, nurture the fire of your own creativity. By doing so, you anchor yourself in sovereignty, rather than in reaction to his hunger. There is a danger, of course, in mistaking silence for manipulation. True silence is not a ploy to control, but an expression of depth. The High Priestess does not withdraw to play a game. She withdraws because her inner world demands reverence. She understands that giving constant access dilutes her essence. She withholds not to wound, but to preserve the sanctity of her being. This distinction is everything. Manipulation breeds resentment. Sovereignty awakens reverence. Imagine again the forgotten key lying on the stone floor. Each day he sees it, but he cannot bring himself to pick it up. He believes it belongs to her, that if only she would reach for it, the door between them would open again. But the truth is cruel and liberating. The key is his, and it opens no door to her. It opens the hidden chamber of his own psyche. Until he dares to use it, he will remain a prisoner of obsession, circling her absence without resolution. And here lies the prophecy that runs like a red thread. What he obsesses over is not her vanishing, but the confrontation with his own soul. The woman becomes a symbol, a vessel of his longing, but her true gift is the silence that forces him into confrontation. If he rises, he may become a man capable of meeting her as she is, rather than as the projection he once adored. If he refuses, he will remain trapped, a moth circling the same flame, consumed by the light he can never hold. For you, the listener, the question presses closer. Will you dare to hold the silence long enough for him to meet himself, or will you collapse into the comfort of filling the void? To vanish is not to disappear into nothingness. It is to step into archetype, into sovereignty, into the temple of your own power. The man's obsession is not your responsibility to soothe. It is the shadow he must wrestle if he wishes to stand before you as an equal. So ask yourself this: when his longing grows louder than words, will you break the silence, or will you let the silence speak for you? There comes a moment when the silence no longer feels like absence but like presence of another kind, a heavy presence that presses against him with unbearable intensity. The woman who vanished becomes more alive in his mind than she ever was in the room beside him. Every glance she once gave now grows in meaning. Every word she once spoke expands into endless interpretations. In her silence, she becomes infinite. He obsesses not because she is gone, but because her absence magnifies her essence until it fills the entire space of his inner world. This is the paradox of feminine withdrawal. The less she gives, the more he feels. What burns beneath this obsession is the collapse of certainty. The masculine craves structure, outcome, linearity. He believes if he moves in a straight line, he will arrive at a conclusion. But her silence is a labyrinth with no map. He cannot find the exit because there is none, only endless circling until he realizes the labyrinth is not hers but his own. This is the deeper teaching of Jungian psychology. What we project outward is what we most resist inward. The woman is not the labyrinth. She is the mirror that reveals its walls. His obsession is not for her body or her words, but for the parts of himself he does not know how to claim. For the woman, this is the ascent towards sovereignty. By withdrawing, she ceases to be an object of his control and becomes a subject in her own right. She embodies the High Priestess, whose power is in what she withholds rather than what she gives. Her silence is not void but presence, not emptiness but fullness turned inward. She tends her inner temple, the place of intuition, creativity, and shadow, refusing to let her essence be diluted by his hunger. This is not punishment, it is initiation. The microaction here is radical in its simplicity. Resist the reflex to explain yourself. Each time you feel the urge to soften his discomfort with reassurance, pause and redirect that energy inward. Ask yourself, what do I need here in my own silence? What part of me is asking for attention, for care, for acknowledgement? When you honor that voice, you feed your own wholeness rather than his dependency. In this act, you move from being a projection to being a sovereign self. Consider again the forgotten key lying where it has always been. He bends toward it, but he still does not see it for what it is. He thinks it will open her door, but the key is only for his own. Until he turns it, he will remain restless, obsessed, circling the flame of her absence. The woman, meanwhile, does not reach for the key, does not explain that it is his. She lets him suffer the silence because the silence itself is his teacher, and whether he learns or not, she remains whole. This is the essence of individuation. The woman who withdraws refuses to be the carrier of his anima any longer. She hands back the projection, silently, without argument. He must take it or leave it. If he takes it, he begins the hard work of claiming his own inner feminine, of reconciling shadow and light within himself. If he refuses, he will stay in obsession, forever haunted by the ghost of a woman who was never truly his. And here the archetypal thread comes full circle. She is the oracle who speaks through silence, the flame behind the veil, the one who does not chase, does not plead, does not collapse. Her withdrawal is not emptiness but sovereignty. She becomes unforgettable not by demanding to be remembered, but by stepping into the timeless role of the one who cannot be possessed. So the cliff opens again. Will he awaken to himself through the torment of her absence, or will he remain trapped in the labyrinth of projection, circling endlessly with the key still in his hand? And for the woman, the question burns even deeper. When you feel his obsession pulling at your silence, will you mistake it for power? Or will you recognize it as the echo of his own shadow, calling him to face himself at last? There is a turning point where the storm of obsession either destroys him or transforms him. A man can only circle absence for so long before he must choose, to numb himself and bury the wound, or to step through it and claim what lies on the other side. If he numbs, the pattern repeats, woman after woman carrying his anima, each one turning into smoke the moment she steps away. But if he chooses transformation, he must face the brutal recognition that she was never his salvation, never the vessel of his completion. She was only the mirror, showing him the shape of what he has not yet lived within himself. This is the essence of Jung's work. Projection is a trick of the psyche, a way to place our unlived depths onto another so we may glimpse them at a safe distance. But when the mirror vanishes, the distance collapses. He must now feel the weight of his own hunger without escape. The woman's silence presses him toward this moment of crisis. Her refusal to explain denies him the comfort of illusion. She holds the veil closed, not to punish but to force the choice. Remain asleep in projection or awaken into individuation. For the woman, the silence becomes an initiation of her own. Each time she resists the urge to collapse into presence, she claims a deeper part of herself. The High Priestess archetype matures not through constant withdrawal but through sovereign choice. She does not vanish because she fears rejection. She vanishes because her worth cannot be negotiated in the marketplace of reassurance. Her absence becomes the crucible in which his obsession burns and her sovereignty is forged. The micro-action here is both practical and profound. Create rituals of inner devotion. When the pull to explain rises, light a candle instead. When the urge to break silence calls, write your own truth in a journal rather than sending it outward. Anchor your energy into your body, into your breath, into your creative force. These small acts remind you that your power does not depend on his recognition, but on your own ability to hold yourself in fullness. Sovereignty is not an idea, it is a practice, one moment at a time. And what of him? If he dares to pick up the forgotten key, his journey begins. The door it unlocks does not lead back to her but inward, to the realm of his anima. He will discover the feminine within himself, the intuition he suppressed, the vulnerability he denied, the creativity he ignored. He will realize that what he chased in her was always a fragment of himself waiting to be claimed. Only then can he return to her, not as a beggar seeking reflection, but as a man who has met his shadow and emerged whole. But the truth is, many never pick up the key. They circle it endlessly, bound by the comfort of obsession, because obsession allows them to remain victims of desire rather than owners of responsibility. The woman cannot decide for him. She can only hold the silence long enough for the choice to become unbearable. That is her gift and her power, not to lead him through, but to stand firm until he chooses to step across the threshold or remain behind. And here lies the final paradox. The very thing he fears most, her withdrawal, is the only thing that could liberate him. And the very thing she fears most, that silence will keep her forgotten, is the force that engraves her deeper into his psyche than presence ever could. This is why absence becomes obsession, and why obsession, if endured, can lead to awakening. So the red thread tightens toward its resolution. The forgotten key will either be left to rust, or it will be turned at last. And the woman who vanished will either be remembered as an unreachable flame, or encountered anew as a sovereign being, no longer a mirror but a whole world unto herself. The question that remains is the most dangerous of all. When the silence has done its work, will he rise to meet her as she truly is? Or will he remain forever haunted by the ghost of the woman he imagined her to be? And so the silence completes its cycle, not as an absence but as an initiation. For him, it was torment, an endless circling around a door that would not open. For her, it was a passage, a descent into the temple of her own sovereignty. What began as withdrawal has become transformation. She no longer stands as a mirror reflecting his projections. She stands as herself, whole, luminous, untouchable. He may obsess, but her essence no longer bends beneath the weight of his longing. She has become the High Priestess fully realized, the oracle who speaks without words, whose very being teaches the difference between desire and reverence. In Jungian truth, obsession ends not in possession but in recognition. The man who dares to pick up the forgotten key learns that the silence was never about her, it was about him. She awakened his anima, not to enslave him but to invite him into his own inner world. If he chooses to walk that path, he finds a different kind of freedom, the freedom to love her not as projection, but as person. And if he refuses, he remains haunted, forever chasing the phantom of a woman who exists only in the corridors of his imagination. For the woman, the silence is no longer a strategy but a state of being. She embodies what Jung called individuation, not fragmented, not defined by another but whole within herself. She knows now that her power is not in endless presence or constant explanation, but in her ability to hold space for mystery. She does not give herself away to soothe his shadow. She lets him face it, and in doing so, she claims her own. The micro-action that seals this transformation is simple yet profound. Choose sovereignty daily. When you feel the pull to seek validation, return instead to your own breath. When you feel the ache of being misunderstood, anchor yourself in the knowledge that your worth is not measured by his recognition. When you fear being forgotten, remember the paradox revealed. Absence does not erase you, it engraves you deeper. In this way, sovereignty is practiced not in grand gestures, but in the smallest moments of choosing yourself over his projection. The forgotten key has now fulfilled its prophecy. It was never meant to open her but him. It lay in plain sight all along, and whether he lifts it or leaves it, its meaning has been revealed. She does not wait for him to turn it. She does not linger in the doorway. She walks forward, whole, radiant, carrying her flame into the world without apology. He may watch, he may ache, he may obsess, but she has already crossed into a realm beyond his grasp, the realm of the sovereign woman. This is the final release, to recognize that the obsession of a man is not the measure of a woman's worth. It is only the echo of his own unfinished work. The woman who vanishes and holds her silence does not do so to wound, but to remind herself that her essence cannot be bargained away. She becomes unforgettable not by chasing, but by choosing. She becomes magnetic not by performing, but by embodying. And in this embodiment, she no longer waits for him to awaken. She moves on her path, sovereign and whole, whether he follows or remains behind. So let the silence stand. Let the veil remain closed. Let the forgotten key lie where it belongs. The obsession was never yours to manage, it was his to transform. And the lesson was never about being chosen, it was always about choosing yourself. Share the moment you felt most empowered in the comments below. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.